Welcome to Capitol Hill. Today, the Prime Minister was joined by the independent MP Tony Windsor to mark the switching on of the first mainland site for the National Broadband Network, while the Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey was at the National Press Club, not telling the government wanted to hear about the Coalition's budget reply. There's much discussion too about the carbon price the country can afford and what needs to be done to make the shift from coal-powered to gas-powered electricity generation. To discuss these issues, I've been joined in Brisbane by Liberal MP Teresa Gambaro and in Melbourne by Labor's Kelvin Thomson. Welcome to you both.
Good afternoon, Lyndall, Teresa.
Kelvin, if I can start with you, the Climate Change Minister Greg Combet says if the carbon price fails again, climate policy will become the poison chalice for Australian politics for the next generation. But as a Labor backbencher, does it feel a little like a poison chalice now?
Well, I think the truth is, Lyndall, that we're living beyond our means, and the way in which we're living is damaging the Earth's atmosphere, and we simply have to come up with a way of meeting our energy needs which doesn't generate the carbon. We have to move into areas like wind and solar and geothermal energy. I think it's significant today that Greg Hunt on your channel, ABC24, said that the Liberal Party was working on the basis of $15 a tonne. So he's really let the cat out of the bag here. After all the moral outrage and the indignation and the July and all that sort of thing, the truth is that the Liberal Party has been working on a carbon price all along.
But Teresa, the Coalition has used the $15 a tonne figure before as its sort of average price for emissions. Can you afford to reach the same target that the government is reaching, but say you can do it at half the cost? Is that realistic?
Look, we've just seen today the absolute debacle that the Inter-Parliamentary Committee on Climate Change is. We have Bob Brown and Christine Mills saying that it should be $43 a tonne. We have Greg Combet saying it should be less than $40 a tonne. Then we have Sarah Hanson-Young out there saying that it should be closer to $100 a tonne, and that should be put on the table. It's an absolute debacle. The Deloitte's report showed what the government is up to. This will be an extra impost on families that are struggling under the burden of increased groceries price, health costs, increase in electricity power. Plus, on top of that, they're putting a carbon tax on, they're putting a mining tax, and we've got a flood levy. The policy is a debacle.
Teresa, all the prices you mentioned were talked about at different points of the spectrum. The government says the starting price will be well south of $40. The $40 a tonne price is talked about to push the shift from coal to gas, and the $100 a tonne Sarah Hanson-Young was talking about was a complete shift to renewables. If your assumed price is $15 a tonne, do you think it can do the same job as the government is saying that a price south of $40 a tonne can do?
We've got other measures as well, and Greg is on the record widely as talking about renewable energy targets, direct action in planting trees, carbon storage methods. But one only has to look at what's happening in California at the moment. The carbon price there is estimated to rise to over $70 by 2020. There is only one place for carbon price to go, and it's to go upwards. And that I'm quite concerned about the compensation to Australian families will be in the long term.
Kelvin, given there's all this confusion now with different sorts of carbon prices being mentioned, do you risk the public stopping listening to you before you've even got a chance to get the detail out?
Well, I think people will be very interested to see the final product once the Multi-Party Committee on Climate Change releases that. And obviously a lot of the debate now is being conducted without knowledge of the policy detail, without knowledge of the legislation. I think Australians will be very interested to look at the detail once that's announced.
Kelvin, they're in disarray. They can't agree on a thing. They're in complete disarray, and today the Deloitte's report, according to Bob Brown, wasn't even shown to the committee. And the Greens are certainly not towing the line with the Labor Party at the moment. They want a greater input into this, and we saw the other day that that report wasn't even run through them, yet it was released to the business community. So it's an absolute tatters, this carbon tax.
No, the policy which is in disarray is the opposition policy, which has no hope of achieving the emissions reductions which the opposition claims to be signed up to, that is to say a 5% cut by 2020 compared with year 2000 levels. To achieve that through the direct purchase of carbon emission reductions would have an impact on households of the order of $700 per annum, and there is nothing in the Coalition's budget figuring which takes that into account. So the Coalition's position on carbon is simply not serious.
If we could move on to the question of the Coalition's budget. Joe Hockey gave his budget reply speech to the National Press Club. In questions he was asked about the Coalition's costings on its figures. He's standing by those costings, even though when Treasury looked at the numbers, it found a black hole of the size of, I think, about $11 billion. Teresa Gambaro, do you think it's realistic to stand by those costings when Treasury did not agree?
Look, firstly, we're not in government, we're in opposition, and this is not an election year. And in an election year, those costings will be provided in full. If the government wants us to run the economy, and they're in government at the moment, they should just give Tony Abbott the keys to the lodge.
But if you were in government, it will be Treasury putting in place your budget too.
Well,
so do you have to pay some mind to what they think of your costings?
Sorry, I've got a problem with my earpiece. At the moment, the government has the full support of the Treasury officials, hundreds of them. We are in opposition. What Joe did today was present a policy platform, a vision, and in an election year, those budget figures will be released.
Kelvin, the Greens haven't said which budget measures they will and won't support. The Independents haven't said that either. Is it realistic to ask the opposition to say what it will and won't support, given you haven't put those measures into Parliament yet?
The Australian public are being let down by Tony Abbott and by Joe Hockey, who simply haven't produced a budget reply. And let me quote from Peter Costello, who I think Teresa would regard as an expert on matters budgetary. Peter Costello said that
very good man, Kelvin.
said that a budget reply consists of going through the budget, saying what things the opposition agrees with, what things it doesn't, putting forward alternative tax proposals and putting forward when they will start, how they will be paid for and what the opposition would do if it were bringing down a budget. So the fact is that the opposition is shortchanging Australians by not producing a budget reply.
But Kelvin, isn't that what governments always say about opposition budget replies? Opposition budget replies, and I've looked at a few over the last few days, rarely go into the detail of what they will and won't support in a government's budget.
Well, Peter Costello said in 2004 that's what a budget reply entails, and I imagine that Teresa would regard him as an expert on things budgetary, saying the opposition has an obligation to say what they would do differently. Tony Abbott says he wants an election, well, we're entitled to know what he would do differently.
And Kelvin, why didn't your government put the costings for the mining tax in the budget? This is going to have a profound effect on the Australian economy, and you didn't put any costings regarding the mining tax in the budget. That is just absurd.
If we could move finally on to the question of the National Broadband Network. Teresa, the first mainland site for the NBN is now underway. Is this something that in the end will be, as Joe Hockey was asked today, an egg that's difficult to unscramble when you do get into government?
Look, a phenomenal amount of money is being spent on this, the NBN. One only has to look at Tasmania, where the uptake was only 11%. I hope that the uptake is certainly going to be higher in the New England area. But you're talking about an investment of $18.2 billion by 2014-15, and that's the government's basing that on a commercial return that 58% of people will use the services provided on the NBN. Well, that's almost 5 times the number of people that took it up at Tasmania. Look, I think it's going to be pushing uphill, and it's an enormous investment. We've got other alternatives that have been outlined by Malcolm Turnbull, which will deliver it at half the cost.
Kelvin, the government's had problems with delivery of its programs in the past. You really need this to work, don't you?
The take-up in relation to the NBN in Armidale is of the order of 87%. I think today is an historic day for regional and rural Australia because the rollout of the NBN network commencing on the mainland at Armidale is something which will enable people to live in their hometowns while now having access to health services, education services and training and business opportunities which people in the capital cities like Teresa and I take for granted. I think this will do a great deal to end the tyranny of distance, and I think it really is a significant step forward for people in rural and regional Australia.
Teresa, do you think...
Kelvin, with that we totally agree, but look, all Australians should have access to the NBN, but the cost at which your government's delivering it will far outweigh any return that you're going to get back in the future, and that's really what we're about, delivering a range of services. For example, sorry, keeps popping out, wireless in terms of, node to the premises.
Kelvin, do you think, given that the opposition is proposing an alternative, that some people will still simply see the NBN as too expensive?
I think once this is rolled out, people will appreciate just what a significant piece of nation-building infrastructure it will be. It will offer people better access to health services, better access to education services, better access to training and business opportunities. Frankly, for far too long, people in rural areas have not had access to decent, high-speed, high-quality communications infrastructure. We're about fixing that.
Teresa, do you think that the response to your attitude to the NBN should be judged on the response? If people like it, would you look at keeping it?
You're talking about the coalition's Malcolm Turnbull's alternative, yes. Is that what you're talking about?
No, about the NBN.
My response about, sorry Lyndall, what are you referring to there? Whether we think...
If people like the NBN, should you keep it?
Well, look, no productivity report was done into the cost effectiveness. I'm very suspicious about the government's ability to deliver such a huge program where it can't, we read today, it can't even get the set-top boxes program right, and already they're having to recall, set-top boxes 700 to 1,000.
Okay,
so
I'm sorry.
I think that we are capable of running an alternative program at a fraction of the cost.
We'll have to leave it there. Sorry about that. Teresa Gambara and Kelvin Thomson, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Lyndall.
Good to talk with you.